You're breathe on climate.
I'm Dave, and I would like you to know that I am a proper little hero. See, yesterday I donated blood. I know, isn't I brilliant? They gave me a weak lemon drink and some lovely biscuits after I was done, but what they should have given me is a medal. You see, I actually am a proper little hero. For two reasons. Firstly, because that blood's, going to save someone's life. You should do it. But the other reason I'm a proper little hero is this. I, dear listener, am a trypanophobe. I am massively scared of needles. They make me want to scream and run away. Even saying this to you now, I can feel a kind of wobbly sensation in my delicate areas. But I give blood anyway. I tell the nurse I'm scared, they talk to you about the football, they hold your hand and you kind of get through it. So, you see, I really am a hero.
Listen, girls, I don't know whether it's the time or place to say this, but my mate Ace here is incredibly brave.
I guess everyone's got that fear, right, that makes them feel flimsy. My mate Matt is scared of things with lots of little holes in it, like corals or sponges. My wife Ruth, who you're going to hear doing a Dolly Parton impression in a minute, is terrified of heights. Up a mountain once, she froze in fear for about half an hour. Well, for me, it's needles. And the interesting thing is, it turns out that fear comes from a very, very early part of my brain. I asked my dad a while ago, I said, "Oi Dad," I said, "any idea why I am scared of needles?" And he said this: I was born pretty premature, certainly premature for the time I was born at, because I'm a very old man. I spent a long time in one of them little mini greenhouse incubator things for tiny little babies, and I was given a lot of injections. Every day the doctor would come round and stick a needle into me, which I did not like at all. Even at the age of 6 days old, my dad said I would hear the crinkle of the syringe packet being opened up, and I would start to wriggle and cry. I was like Pavlov's dog. A bell was rung and I, metaphorically, salivated. It's all very well me thinking I'm some sort of grown-up, clever, rational man, but I am, if the truth be told, little more than a dribbling dog. So there you go. That fear of needles of mine, it goes way back, before I could speak or even see properly. Way back to tiny, purple, impotent Dave. Little more than a collection of limbs attached to a central nervous system, learning to associate the idea that you're going to get stabbed with a syringe with the sound of its packaging, and becoming scared. In the last episode of Your Brain on Climate, we talked all about hope. To hope, we concluded, was to be human. But as our philosopher queen Dolly Parton said,
"The way I see it, if you want the rainbow, you gotta put up with the rain."
It's not going to get better than that.
because it is also 100% human to be afraid. Now this can be bad. Fear can make us freeze on the side of a windy mountain when it would be a lot better for us to move on. It can make us believe things aren't true just to make the fear go away. It can make us vote for loudmouth strongmen who use fear as their modus operandi, although well done Hungary on that front. The world right now can feel like fear is in the ascendancy, and let's be clear, there is a lot to be scared about. But simply saying it's all bad only feels like half the story, because maybe without fear, we wouldn't get half as much good stuff done. Maybe I wouldn't have made myself give blood if I wasn't somehow scared of it and wanted to conquer that. And look, if I'm honest, everything I've ever done on climate change and stuff is probably underpinned by being absolutely terrified of it and wanting to do something about it.
Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
Now, I ain't no Jedi, Master Yoda, but I'm not 100% sure that's right. I'm scared about climate change, and it's because I'm scared about it that I'm doing something about it. So fear can be motivating just as much as it is petrifying. It's all about what you do with it, isn't it? So what determines when it terrifies us to the spot versus when it gets us to do something?
All right, I'll give it a try.
No, try not. Do or do not. There is no try.
One thing I am clear on is that you're not serious about understanding the psychology of climate change if you're only interested in banging on about hope and you're not interested in learning about fear. So, strap in. In this episode of Your Brain on Climate, we're doing that. We're talking about being afraid. And while fear can feel like our Achilles heel when it comes to doing something about the world, well, much as we like to think otherwise, maybe we're not going to get very far without it.
Your brain on climate.
Joining me on this episode of Your Brain on Climate is my friend, the podcaster and academic, Professor Sarah Jaquette Ray.
I'm a professor and a chair of environmental studies at Cal Poly Humboldt, and that's in California, USA. And I'm also author of A Field Guide to Climate Anxiety, How to Keep Your Cool on a Warming Planet, and podcast host of Climate Magic.
Now, that name feels familiar is because I was a guest on that there Climate Magic just a few episodes ago. I banged on about all sorts of stuff, blah, 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 me banging on. You can find the chat on the Climate Magic feed or this one where I reposted it recently. It is, I'm afraid to say, an annoyingly good show.
Mine's better. No, just kidding.
Oi, get off my show. Sarah is an expert on a great many things about climate psychology, and one of them, about which we chat in this episode, is fear. So I talked to Sarah about whether fear is always bad, whether it's always unhelpful to trigger or not. I ask her what happens to us when we're afraid, and what can make scared people easier to manipulate by beastly evil sods, and how come this doesn't always work. We talk about what lies underneath our fears, things like disgust and repellence, where this comes from, how it's constructed, and how you can stop it being used against you. And we chat about how to keep yourself just the right amount of scared of climate change without freaking out entirely. Now, before we do any of that, the usual quick housekeeping. A reminder, this podcast is all made by me. I'm a humble indie podcaster. I script it, I edit it, all of it. And I pay my guests when they accept the money because I value their time, and I hope you do too. So if you like what I do and you want me to keep on doing it, please do consider chipping in a couple of quid a month over at patreon.com/yourbrainonclimate. And if you can't do that or you won't do that, a 5-star review and a written endorsement at your podcast medium of choice would go a really long way. Remember also, when you hear this noise, it denotes wisdom. That owl means someone, usually my guest, has said something you might want to read more about. So if you check the show notes, there's going to be a link to more info. Right, on with it. This conversation with Sarah was recorded about 6 weeks ago, something like that, before the US and Israel launched their war against Iran. But even so, it felt like it was probably worth starting a conversation about fear to ask Sarah how she's coping, state of the world-wise. Is she afraid? And don't worry, by the way, this episode gets a lot cheerier as we go on.
Yeah, funny. It's a big question, but I have a really instinctive answer, which is, yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Right?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Say more about that. I'm not. Let me just say, I'm not necessarily asking you to go into the depths of your kind of fear, but but what are the things? You know, how do you feel about the future right now?
Yeah, I mean, I can do kind of like a meta-analysis of what's happening to my nervous system, but I won't do that quite yet. I would say that, based on what I observe and read and the things that my colleagues, friends, and community are feeling and seeing too, things don't look good in terms of all the things that I care about and love. So I have grown up caring a lot about things like reproductive justice, women's rights, gay people having equal access to a good life as everybody else. The environment kind of came later in my life, actually. That wasn't sort of an early seed for me, but in my kind of college, graduate school, adult life, I started to think, ooh, the more than human world, what are we doing there? That's not good. And so the information as I got more literacy, if you will, around what's happening with the earth, what's happening with vulnerable populations, what's happening around the world, how much my privilege, my democracy, my freedom of speech, my ability to have a career if I want to, and children and all the rest as a woman, my access to education, we're all just really not automatic for a lot of people. Just even being in America has its own kind of insulations. And so peeling back the layers of all those things and having access to more literacy around what's happening in the world outside of my insulated bubble, I don't think it's good. And as we're seeing in the last, I'd say 10 years or so, the people who are in bubbles are also not protected from what's going to be happening. And so maybe I'm late to the fear game as a fairly privileged person. But I think I agree with folks who say things like, if you're not afraid of the future, then you're not paying attention. So, democracy, all of it.
Oh, yeah, democracy. Let's go. Yeah, that as well.
All the things. The polycrisis is what they call it. But I think fear is a reigning emotion or a thematic emotion of my later adult life, for sure.
Would you say, since you're over in the States, but we've got our own set of political mayhem going on over here as well, and around the world, obviously, and then climate change and all the rest of it. Would you say, does the world feel fearful to you at the moment?
You mean do others feel
a vibe? Yeah, I don't know. Do you detect a vibe of fear in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I remember when I was I don't think it was graduate school or something. I remember watching a film called The Fog of War. And I remember being really struck by how fear can be manufactured in order to control people. And I remember thinking, fear isn't necessarily really a natural response to automatic information we're getting. It is mediated, right? It's not just about reality. It's about its mediation and how it's packaged and whose interests are served by people feeling fearful. And so I had a little bit of a wake-up moment there about, what happened in Nazi Germany, and thinking to myself, okay, good. It's a good thing we're aware of how fear operates at this political level. It's a good thing we know that now, because we're not going to do it again. And here we go. We're doing it, and it's shocking to me, the willingness with which people are signing up for fear and to surrender what little power they have in order to have people in power help them feel like they can solve their fears. And I'd even say that before sort of a pre-Trump era moment, I remember giving a talk to a college student classroom about my book about climate anxiety. And this student had such intense climate anxiety that they said something like in a follow-up email to me that they would be willing to give up their civil liberties if some, green benevolent leader could come and solve the climate crisis faster. Because in democracy, it's slow. It's slow to get what we need done, and places that don't have all those hurdles of getting the masses to come along might be able to do more sustainable policy faster. And so she really felt like, oh yeah, I'd like to sign up for that to get this job done. And I think that comes out of that kind of surrendering comes out of fear. I know that, for example, a lot of the research around Republican aversion to climate change stuff has to do with fear of government regulation, for example. So this sort of long history of getting, don't tread on me, getting the government off your backs and out of your life. So you attach something like, climate change to a fear discourse around something else, and the fear of that other thing outstrips the fear of climate change, right? So people's fears, whose fears about what trumps other fears that we have, and we're sort of having a fear battle in politics,
The best-selling hat. Trump was right about everything. And I don't say that in a braggadocious way, but it's true. I've been right about everything. And I'm telling you that if you don't get away from the green energy scam, your country is going to fail. And if you don't stop people that you've never seen before, that you have nothing in common with, your country is going to fail.
Now, Dave here, there was a word that Sarah used there, which I wanted just to spool back quickly and explain. because it's important. That word was mediated. Our response to any bit of information that we receive about the world, said Sarah, might or might not be to be scared, depending on how that information is presented to us and packaged to us, and what we're encouraged to feel by the person presenting it. That process in the middle that sits between us and the thing is how something is mediated to us. Example, take COVID, right? Not a nice example for anyone, but a great deal of its day-to-day scariness in practice came from the fact that governments told us this thing was risky and scary, and that they locked things down. They made us work from home and stuff. And because most of us ain't virologists and wouldn't really know, absent that kind of information one way or the other, if a virus is scary, it needed the government to mediate our experience of it. They sat in the middle of our perception of it. They deliberately made it scarier than it would otherwise have been, up in our risk perception, so that we would behave differently.
You must stay at home.
Now that concept of mediating things is core, actually, to what we're talking about for the rest of this episode. In fact, it's probably core to what we think about climate change at all. Because as we've talked about before, climate change is just too big for our brains to eat all at once. So our experience of it is necessarily mediated by the way we encounter it, by all the stuff around us, how it's covered in the newspapers, the media, and discussed in the conversations that we have. And you can see it play out. Like in the UK, if you pick up two papers, like the right-leaning Telegraph or the left-leaning Guardian, and you find the same underlying story about climate change being told, you'll find that it's being mediated to you in completely different ways to make you feel completely different things. Mediation is sometimes called being an agent of reality. You get to decide what someone's impression of the world is. And when you find climate change covered in such different ways, you are literally getting different ideas about reality. That makes me wonder about stuff we will come to over the course of this chat, but about which of the two emotions, if you like, the opposite emotions of hope and fear, if hope is an emotion, which of those is kind of does the most work for us in terms of getting stuff to happen on anything at all?
I just love that question. And it's a question that I'm kind of dogged by, honestly. I remember the question that drove me when I first turned my attention to these topics of emotions and climate politics was when I sort of thought about my students and their despair and their apathy and their apathy may have not been the original thing, but kind of apathy and like existential anxiety about what was happening. And I would say that my initial thought there was, okay, what is the emotion they need to feel in order to feel like they can get to work in the morning and get the job done of what needs to happen around climate change? And I remember thinking, I'm going to go on a hunt for that emotion. Like I'm going to do all the research about all the emotions and how they shape people's politics and how they shape people's energy. And I remember thinking, and the initial answer to that was when I ask folks, what do you think the holy grail emotion is? A lot of people do say hope, right? Like if we don't have hope, then we're not going to do the thing. And I don't disagree with that. I'm kind of in the kind of Christiana Figueres, gritty hope or gritty optimism or whatever she calls it category. Joanna Macy talks about active hope. And I think that, I agree with Greta Thunberg that hope comes after the action, like you do the stuff and then it kind of cultivates hope in you. And so, it's a complicated emotion, but I would say that in the end in all that research, my conclusion is that there's no one emotion. That was sort of a red herring question to begin with. And I would say also that people are really different about this, right? So like fear, hope, anger, anxiety, these are all emotions that motivate our behavior in all kinds of complicated ways that our unique backgrounds and contexts dictate, our unique biology dictates, our unique environments dictate. And I don't think we can kind of put our finger on a scale and say, let's like generate more hope over here and that will get what we need. We can't kind of play that game, we can't game it, And I would say that though, from the research that I have done, and I don't love it, but I would say that for immediate action, fear does, in fact, drive behavior change more than hope. So, quote unquote, negative or uncomfortable emotions, whether it's fear or guilt or anger, is more likely to generate immediate behavior change than positive or more comfortable emotions in general. That's a sweeping statement, but that gets to your brilliant question, and I don't love the answer.
Which sort of, and I guess the question of what do we mean, what do we mean by immediate and what's useful? Because if I've got a massive bloody great snake in my bed, it's not a euphemism, then I will be motivated. I will be motivated to get out of my bed more than I would be by the hope that there might be a chocolate biscuit if I get out of bed. Right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But something that I've talked about to many guests on this show is the climate change ain't like that.
Yes.
Like it's not that kind of thing.
Threat.
And even if it was that kind of thing, after a while, I'll probably calm down about the snake being in my bed. Like you can't sustain that kind of fear. So what does that mean for climate change then?
Thank you for picking up on my caveat about immediate action, because that's exactly the caveat, right? This is not... this is why when people finish the ecological footprint activity, which, is the kind of little test you take to figure out how many Earths you would need to supply resources to live your lifestyle. I think, the intended emotional result of doing that activity is guilt, right? Guilt and shame and, oh no, I consumed too much. People who research the sort of psychology of that will say, oh yeah, that guilt does that activity change people's behaviors? It turns out, yes, that activity changes. So the emotion that you get at the end of that does dictate behavior change for about 6 weeks.
Right. That's
and
not
you're
long
absolutely
enough.
right. We can't do 6 weeks. We got to do the long term. And so in my research and sort of the way I push it is exactly that. This is a long haul, lifelong thing that you may never actually see the results of, sort of that cathedral thinking that, Greta Thunberg talks about. And I think the cathedral thinking mindset, or maybe we want to call it more of an indigenous perspective of 7 generations of thinking about a temporal scale outside of your own lifetime, which is very uncomfortable for people like me who are grown up in a very individualistic Western notion that all that matters is my life on the planet, this kind of like thinking beyond yourself in a bigger time scale really does, I think, dictate a different ethical orientation, and therefore it results in different emotions that work, And I think this is where I often think, how are you, I ask my students, how are you going to stay in this work for the long haul and not burn out? Because guess what? That like fiery energy of being young that got you on the streets to do that protest, it will probably burn you out, And I'm thinking about the beautiful book by Hannah Proctor called Burnout, was the politics of emotional defeat or something like that. And she basically talks about, this burnout stuff and all these emotions of a lot of social movement activism is not actually the right fit for something like climate change. That's not her particular argument, but that's my argument. Like, this isn't the right fit of emotions. The sort of normal things we think about emotions and social movements has a lot to teach us about our work for climate change, but there's some limitations there for the very reason you just described. It's a lifetime thing, a beyond your lifetime thing. And for that reason, some neuropsychologists will say that our brains are pleasure-seeking machines. And so this idea that the work itself, we need to find some pleasure in it. It can't feel entirely like martyrdom or sacrifice. It can't feel like just constant deprivation, which is what environmentalism usually asks us for. And it has to have this feeling of, like all of the things I'm gaining, the abundance and the dopamine hits I'm gaining from, not putting carbon in the atmosphere. Can we frame, this is kind of an Adrienne Maree Brown argument, but like, can we frame all of the things that we need to do around climate change as gaining abundance, as gaining pleasure, as something that's, adding to our lives in a way that hasn't really been done before? And I think that's really where I'm at about it. I think it has to feel good.
So we all know what it means, right? To be afraid of something, how it feels. You become more alert. Your breath might change. Your heart beats faster. Like me with them syringes, your tummy might go a little bit wriggly, and you might even need to do a poo. Now, the thing is, we also know, right, what it feels like to no longer be afraid of something which we used to be afraid of. So here's an example. I play saxophone and clarinet in various bands. When I was starting out playing in those bands, it was my turn coming up to take a solo, stand up and do some jazz. I would be like mortally, monumentally terrified of it. My hands would shake. I'd stand up to play and my legs would shake. My embouchure would shake. The notes would come out all squeaky and they too would shake. But these days, not so much anymore. I get a nice useful surge of adrenaline, but I don't get mortal fear. I know I can, in the scheme of things, do it, and I'm not gonna die. Now that took a long time, and a lot of doing solos, messing up, realising the world didn't end, and failing a bit better next time. But I got there in the end. I can remember what it felt like, but I no longer feel it. Now that means we can understand that fear isn't just a straightforward thing. It works in mysterious ways. We can attune to it. Psychologically speaking, we can push fear further away from us. And the further away, actually or conceptually, is that thing we're scared of, be that a snake, a tiger, or a 12-bar Benny Goodman solo at the start of Sing, 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 the less scary it becomes. You thought a bit about emotions, a lot about emotions. What happens to us when we are fearful? Like, is there an instinctive? Obviously, you know, if you're scared of something like a snake, you will run away from that snake. But when you're in a sort of state of fear, like maybe our politics is characterised by at the moment, is it natural and obvious that humans will start looking for people or things to blame for that fear? Do we start trying to justify it? Is that inevitable that we do that?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're sort of speaking about something that I think you have in another episode, what social psychologists will call risk perception theory, which is, what conditions does a threat have to have in order for human beings with our normal equipment to perceive this thing as a threat that they need to do something about, right? Like the saber-toothed tiger in the weeds, or like the bear or the snake in the bed thing, right? So there's certain conditions that are required for us to perceive something as a threat, and also the brain wiring prefers us to do curing things or to do treatment things more than preventative things, which is really, I think, also an interesting dimension of the risk perception. So, the need for us to have a proximal source of the threat in order for us to do something about it that's one of the conditions. It has to be something right there we can do something about. And when something really amorphous, like, all of colonization produced the conditions by which we then got enlightenment, and then now we have carbon in the atmosphere, this sort of like a really amorphous causal effects of things make it really challenging to identify the source of the problem. Or if we say all of humanity is doing this to the environment, it makes it very difficult for anyone to do anything about it. Or if we say that climate change is inevitable because it's the natural cycles, or some people would even say, it's God's will or whatever, bring on the rapture, right? These different kinds of arguments are for one, they make it really hard to identify any particular person who can be held accountable. So that's one thing that does. So there's an argument to be made that we want that, right? We want to have someone accountable. And it also has this effect of saying, well, therefore I can't do anything about it, right? So it's very disempowering. So it does actually help people get motivated if there is a tangible, actionable thing right in front of them that they can hold accountable and do something about. The downside of that, of course, is that scapegoating becomes a really common effect of big, amorphous, complicated problems, right? So, for example, one of the things that happens in the U.S., and I dare say it's also happening in the U.K., but we have a long history of it in the U.S., anti-immigrant sentiment coming out of concerns about natural resources and in the environment. So we have multiple stages of this that have really peaked in the U.S. But just for one example, Jefferson didn't think that Native people in the U.S. were doing the right things to nature and the environment. They weren't, so quote unquote, improving it by settling it and growing food on it and that sort of thing. So he brought his ideas of what the right ways of being in nature were to his conquest of the U.S., and that was his argument for why natives should be dispossessed of land ownership, right? So this idea of what we're supposed to be doing with nature very much dictates whether or not we have access to it, whether or not we're allowed to be in the country, whether or not we're good ecological subjects and citizens that should be allowed. Perry Miller famously wrote this book called Nature's Nation, and Teddy Roosevelt picked up on that. We have a really strong moment of this in the Progressive era when we had huge amounts of immigration coming from Eastern Europe and China, where it was like, oh, these people are dirty for the environment. And then another big push around the 70s when we had Paul Ehrlich and folks talking about the population bomb, zero population growth, anti-immigrant sentiment and zero population growth went hand in hand as checks to the U.S. population. Really, it was about racism, right? And Teddy Roosevelt even talked about race suicide and immigration causing race suicide. But the environmental arguments became really good green code for these like really unpalatable things. If you packaged it in like an environmental argument, people could buy into it a lot more. And we're seeing that another round of that happening again around, immigrants not doing good things for the environment. And when they come, they increase their ecological footprint by 400%. And, there's all kinds of things coming around packaging anti-immigrant sentiment in a green or climate or environmental ways to make people decide that we shouldn't have them here,
No, and I mean, you see that happening in, it's populism 101, isn't it? Like, you see that happening in just your general immigration debate here in the UK, I know for sure over in the States, where you've got like complicated factors affecting people's lives. And the easy person to blame can often be, or certainly be portrayed to be, the immigrant that's coming in and is taking your money or your jobs or ruining your culture or whatever. And like, it's horrible and having terrible consequences, but it must somehow work on us. This idea of like, here is a complicated system with an obvious person to blame, who, as you say, for whatever reason you can also be wired to think is sort of dirty or other or not worthy or impure or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a much harder thing to say to people. Look, you really like the cheap labor and cheap goods that comes from having undocumented immigrants, but having undocumented immigrants is really, threatening in all of these other ways, right? Like they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs and all that sort of thing.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats, they're eating the pets.
And so that whole paradox, right? That hypocrisy of we like them, but we like them in the shadows. We don't like them to have power. We don't like them to whatever. And that hypocrisy is solved by having very big performative anti-immigrant stuff happening so that politicians get pat on the back for that, but not actually stopping it, right? Not actually making it that difficult. Although right now that's not where we're at in the U.S., but that has been like the Operation Gatekeeper under Clinton, Obama, Biden. The sort of we kind of need the immigrants, but we got to make the masses happy by doing things where we stop them, and we really like them to be illegal because that makes all this stuff really cheap. So, threading that needle, talk about complexity, right? How do you explain to your voters that's the needle you're trying to thread, It's very exploitative and you're not about to say that, So yeah, there's a real sense of it's a lot easier just to scapegoat. Much more elegant, more simple. It fits in with the sort of good versus evil binary thinking that people like. People want that kind of simplicity binary thinking, like who's good, who's bad. Let me get in line with that.
And how can I make, what's the easy thing I can do, the easy lever I can pull to make this complicated thing go away? Because it's easier to do that as well. I'm sure we all do versions of this, like it's easier to do that than to blame systems, right? Like kind of how the system works and, it's our own roles in that system. And we do have a tendency, I think, to kind of go, if I've got the choice of two things to blame here, that person over there, or the entire system that I operate in. And we're pretty good at ignoring the system bit.
Yeah, and I also think that's a key component of risk perception theory. The thing has to have a face for it to be really scary, right? So if it doesn't have a face, then it's a system, or it's climate change, or it's, something that doesn't seem to have will or volition against us. It's very hard to get worked up about it.
Your brain on climate.
Welcome back to Your Brain on Climate. I'm Dave, and in this episode I'm chatting all about fear with the wonderful Professor Sarah Jaquette Ray. Back in an early episode of this show, I talked to Yol Inbar about disgust, an emotion that when you dug down into it, it seemed to me, and Yol, was at the root of a lot of things that people think at a very basic level about the world. Because disgust, like fear, is pretty primal. Like rotten food makes us feel sick. But humans being the spectacularly messed up bags of water that we are, we also project that idea of disgust onto things that are not physically disgusting, people, ideas or symbols. But what happens is similar bits of our brain, the insular cortex, for example, neurology fans, that lights up in exactly the same way pretty much when we're disgusted by a politician we don't like as when we are disgusted by maggots in our chips. We feel the same way in our brain about those two kind of different things. Crazy when you think about it, but that's humans for you. To be disgusted by something is to find it repellent. It pushes you away. And so is being scared of something. It is something that you want to not be around, to back away from. You'll have already clocked that Sarah is very interested in how our fears are mediated. We talked about that earlier. What makes us scared of things that we might otherwise not be scared of? And Sarah's written a lot about how making us scared of people, or making us scared of things, is often about triggering in us a sense of disgust, and that we need to be very, very careful when that's being done to us.
I wrote my dissertation and first book really trying to tease apart this concept of environmentalist disgust, drawing on the work of anthropologist Mary Douglas and her Purity and Danger book, where she basically talks about, from an anthropology perspective, whatever we have disgust for is culturally constructed, right? Like it's like the culture you're in tells you that a green lawn is disgusting or is beautiful. Right? I mean, it's not just necessarily something that is visceral, instinctive, and comes right out of just the body reacting to something. It's very much framed and shaped. Yeah.
Some stuff is though, right? Like, kind of the disgust of a bin full of maggots. You can it makes sense why that is disgusting.
Some stuff is, right? And I'll leave it up to those people to think about those things, because what I'm really more interested in is how certain types of people or certain types of behavior about the planet become framed as disgusting, whereas in the mainstream is perfectly lovely and great. I need a straw for that drink, Yeah. Right. Yeah. Or if you have some literacy around sustainability, you'll find certain types of things like a gas guzzling car doing its coal, it's like blowing out of smoke. Really disgusting. And if you find, fossil fuel consumption to be just an awesome representation of American patriotism, you will think that that's just fantastic, right? So the extent to which some of the environmental behaviors that people are having to make decisions about whether they're going to participate in or not, and then the additional layer of whether or not that soothes your need to be in an in-group around a particular political identity, that's very much constructed, right? That's very much framed within a different, whatever culture you're in, right? So like I was just in a country where the farmer's market, all of the different, first of all, the farmer's market wasn't just about like fruits and vegetables that you would eat for pleasure. The vast majority of the stuff there was medicinal stuff that you might use because you don't really have the easiest access to doctors, and that's just what tradition has been giving you all along. And then all of those medicinals were packaged in reusable bottles and Coke bottles and stuff that they found on the side of the road. So imagine bringing that to an American context and asking customers to buy stuff that you put in reused bottles. It would just, the disgust factor, they wouldn't sell, right? Like, whereas the environmental reuse aspect of that is so awesome. And if you're environmentally inclined, you might be like, that's awesome, right? So there's a sense of like, my hygiene tells me I can't do that versus this is good for the environment. I love that. Reuse those bottles all day long, So yeah, I would say, there's that disgust is very much tied to kind of its pair, which I would say is beauty, right? So this sort of that I find that repellent and I find that beautiful. I want to move away from that and I want to move toward that. And I would say that's something that we can change, right? That's educated through us, right? We pick that up in the cultures that we're living in. It's not in terms of the most important environmental things. Those are not necessarily things that are just like maggots in the bin, right? That's like stuff we can shape in culture and in ourselves. And as I notice this too with my students, like as they become more ecologically inclined, they do find certain things disgusting and other things really beautiful that they didn't before. It's changing with them, as they grow into it. And I would say too, this comes with humans, right? So the problem, of course, is when disgust moves into this category of which types of humans do we want to find disgusting because they're maybe are framed as not doing the right environmental thing. And so, for example, Don't Mess with Texas or these like anti-litter campaigns that often came out of anxiety about race and immigration in especially border states, right? That people have linked these kind of anti-litter campaigns with immigration in large part because undocumented immigrants coming across the Mexico border with the U.S. are actually leaving quite a significant amount of trash. Nowhere near the amount of trash that an average American consumes in a day. So the hypocrisy there is noted, right? But this kind of sense of like, oh, the littering thing is now the valence of littering as disgusting had to be created in order for the sort of disgust of immigrants who become kind of equated with the trash that they leave behind, right? They become the trash. And so that makes it a little easier to have a dehumanizing reaction to people because they litter. Or this is really true with like houseless people in my community, right? They leave kind of a lot of trash and they put all their encampments next to rivers and God knows what's going into the rivers, right? So this, ability to muster up a lot of political motivation to remove and to get rid of and exile homeless people because of the trash they leave behind and the threat that they give to the environment is it makes it a lot easier, right? You can skip right over the dehumanization thing and go right to, it's just not good for the environment. I don't care what happens to them. So yeah, disgust as an emotional leverage point for this kind of stuff has been a really big part of the way environmentalism has been picked up by people who want to do social engineering type stuff,
And I guess that works another direction as well, like which you were sort of alluding to earlier, which is the sort of disgust that a lot of activists might have, almost like a kind of physical disgust, almost at like oil executives and kind of rich, polluting people, right? Like, you can imagine it's back like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I was sort of more like, the young firebrand activist who was like, all oil companies are bastards. I would also almost be able to imagine an oil baron sitting there on his fat pile of money, like dripping with oil,
Sweat.
like kind of, I could smell him, I could taste him, I conjured him to mind. And somehow that made the work easier. And I think actually there's an element of that, even of those of us who claim to be on the side of like hope for the future, actually is motivated by that kind of thing as well.
I completely agree. And the same thing is at work there, right? The sort of like flattening out of the multidimensionality of other humans so that it's easier for you to, reconcile doing the thing you're doing to fight them, Yeah. I mean, whether or not those are immigrants or oil barons, it's the same phenomenon happening in our brains to flatten them out, to not see them as whole humans, right? To not want to understand what might be the complex motivations going on there, or much less think about the bigger structural systems that are impinging on them to make these decisions that we find so disgusting, So, absolutely. Whether or not it's an immigrant crossing the border and we find that decision problematic, or an oil baron extracting for their own personal gain, that either of those cases have the same kind of phenomenon of flattening the human out of them.
Which then the implication is, we haven't actually spelled this out, makes it easier or makes it more likely you will fear them, makes it easier for people who would like you to fear stuff to create that emotion in you.
Yes.
So we are at a time in our politics, in the world, everything, when there's an awful lot to be scared about. And whether or not we, should be, I think we should. I agree with you that if, you're not paying attention to stuff, you should be scared. And I've plenty of episodes on here where the first thing you have to do is look at what's going on, understand it, and then you can, be scared of it and work out what to do with it. But yet fear can be a dangerous emotion. It can prompt you to attack the man and not the ball. It can prompt you to, scapegoat. So what do we do, like at this moment now, when everything seems so scary? What do we do collectively? What do we do individually? How do we move fear to something more useful?
Yeah, first of all, we have to be aware that it serves those in power that we feel those things, and that it serves to help us surrender our power prematurely in ways that we might not want to. So there's different arguments that motivate different people to wake up to this, and for me, the big one that I hold on to that makes me want to wake up to it is because you can't ask people to not have those feelings if there's not some buy-in as to why they shouldn't, So the positive feeling of getting out of that fear has to outweigh the positive feeling of staying in the fear, right? So for one, right? So how can we frame a situation where you're like, no, this other alternative where you're not in a state of fear is actually better for you, and you want it. So you need to do some of that work on yourself to get out of the fear state and over to this other place. And that, that's hard to convince people to do. So I'd say, first of all, what is to be gained when we wake up to how that fear is operating on us, and how can we convince people that, the other things to be gained are more valuable to them? That's the first challenge. And for me, the answer to that question is very much this: okay, fear is operating on me in this political way that I don't consent to. And so I'm not going to do it just on principle as a practice of resistance. I am not going to let my power be taken away from me in that way.
So what's an example of that? How might that play out?
How might that play out? So, for example, let's say, I am consuming some social media where people are telling me about how awful this thing is that they've arrested this 5-year-old and taken him to this prison in Texas, right? Yeah, it is really upsetting to me. I go right into this, like, if we're doing those kinds of things or killing these people in Minneapolis, if we're doing those kinds of things, we are really on the road to something very, very frightening, right? So it triggers all this fear in me. This news that I just consumed, it triggers all this fear in me. And it's not that I am going to say that the basis for that fear is wrong and therefore I'm going to rationally get myself out of that fear. What I end up doing instead is say to myself, aha, there's that fear thing again. It's like a fire hose of fear. That is the point of this administration, and I'm not going to participate in it. It's not that I'm inhuman and unsympathetic and can't feel the feelings of this terror and this awful things happening. But the terror is kind of the point. And actually, it really sabotages the resistance to this, in many, many ways, right? So many people react to fear, especially if you're in an individualistic society like we really are in the U.S., by holding up even further or becoming apathetic or checking out completely. So this sort of dissociation mode. If you think about this in terms of nervous systems, right, we have lots of options about how our nervous system wants us to respond to a fear. There's the sort of standard fight, flight, or freeze ones where our amygdala, the reptilian part of our brain, is kind of on fire and we want to get out of there, or we want to fight it, or we're going to freeze, right? Like, don't move. The thing won't kill me if I don't move, So there's these fight, flight, or freeze. But there's also fawn, which is another one that folks have started to think more about in terms of people over-pleasing the enemy so that you don't get in trouble, right? That kind of thing is very also gendered.
Yeah, that one. I do that one.
Yeah, fawning.
Yeah.
Don't get mad at me. I'm good to you. I'm good to you. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'm really good to you. Fawning. And then, of course, there's also leaning into social. So there's a sort of feminist intervention on that one about tending and befriending, right? So leaning into social engagement is something people can do and often do, and that does alleviate a lot of the pain of that amygdala of being fired at. We just don't talk about that one as much. And that one is available to us at any time and is a good idea. This is where I'm thinking about things like mutual aid, all the rest, right? And so, the thing that happens to me is that because I am now studying fear and studying fear in social movements and studying fear in politics, I know that when I'm consuming that news media, it's designed to make me feel that terror. It's designed to throw me into a amygdala hijack where where I'm more likely to just go shopping on Amazon than I am to lean into my mutual aid community, right? So the results of that terror tend to leave us more divided and less organized, and also kind of burn us out, or have that sort of sense of like, I can't live in this fear forever, so I'm going to find some way to put it in a feeling into my body that is comforting, right? Like, what's my closest comfort blanket?
Stuff I was seeing just recently about the number of people in Britain, I'm sure it's the same elsewhere, who are now turning off the news, just saying I don't watch it, And I don't, to be honest, like, I work in the news, like I feel that because the news is not cheery.
No, and there's a sort of, the way I put it is, I really love the work of Joanna Macy here. She talks about the 3 stories of now, and she talks about living in the story of the great unraveling. The thing is that we have a negativity bias already in our brains that's looking for the saber-toothed tiger, that's looking for the threat, that's looking for the problems eating the cats and the dogs, right? Like, we want to see those things because that makes us feel vigilant and makes us feel safe. Mm-hmm. It's an evolutionary thing we have. However, news media, the more it's bought out by corporations, is only interested in our eyeballs. It's not actually interested in disseminating correct information anymore, increasingly, right? So the news media is going to get our eyeballs by triggering that negativity bias, by providing the supply that our demand is requesting. So the eyeballs goes to that stuff, all that inflammatory stuff, all the terrible news, the doom and gloom. It creates this terrible negative feedback loop where we're actually now living in the great unraveling, right? We're living in Joanna Macy's great unraveling all the time because of that consumption of that. And we can choose, the one option is to check out, right? Like you just said, to numb out. Dissociation is a really good, the flight option is very common. And I don't blame people for wanting to do that. It is a source of comfort to just say, la, 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 I'm putting my fingers in my ears and I don't even know what's happening and it's much better. I have my own life and I'm going to stick to it. And I'm totally, dissociation is my favorite response. I got to confess. I'll just put a confession on the table. I love that one. That's my favorite.
Oh, yeah. After I'm done talking to you, I'm dissociating all evening, mate. I tell you that for nothing.
But the thing that I do, the intervention I do is to say, always, 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 how am I today living as much in the story of the great turning, where there are helpers everywhere, where the people are doing the good work, where there's so much to celebrate, where, whatever's happening on the main stage might be taking the most limelight. But and it's kind of glaring, right? Like, if you're looking straight at the sun, it's very glaring. But if you hold up some shadow to the sun, your eyes can adjust and see all the stuff happening in the shadows and all these amazing stories of the great turning happening that are just as important, just as effectual, but just not as newsworthy to cover as the great unraveling. So I have this kind of practice in my own life to say, I'm not going to participate in that fear, trigger, terror stuff that's meant to do this to me. And I'm going to participate in this other thing because I observe when I am paying attention to the great, turning, the stories of the great turning. And I think to myself, I'm not going to give my attention. The attention economy wants my eyeballs to be on this thing. I'm not going to give them that money. I'm going to divest my attention from the great unraveling and from all those bastards making money off of my attention, right? That's where I really get motivated. I'm not going to give it to them, right? And like, if I actually put my attention, my eyeballs and attention and energy onto the stuff I want to grow, the good things happening in the shadows, all of these, things that I love, that I want to nurture, right? The reason I have the fear in the first place, Dave, is because that scary monster in the room is going to destroy something I love, right? If we do that kind of analysis of our own, what is making me afraid of this thing? Well, it's because I'm worried that person is going to undermine everything I love, or the system is going to undermine everything I love. And I can spend a lot of time dissociating from that, wringing my hands about it, having a totally inflamed nervous system about that, which of course is meant to be the point because that wears us down, right? It wears our power down. Or I can say, I resist that. I refuse that. I'm going to take all that energy I have, all the attention and eyeballs and, all that my body can do, and lean into a reaction that's social engagement for my amygdala to soothe me, because that turns out it actually is very healing. There's all kinds of research around this. You've talked to Sarah Stein Lubrano. You have all kinds of people on your show that talk about, relationship does actually heal a lot of these worries and fears. Suffering shared is suffering halved is another great argument right there, right? Like, if we're in community, all those really difficult emotions don't feel as intense. We won't be quite as hijacked by them. And we want to have that sense of I don't want to say having control over emotions. That's certainly not the right way to think about it, but channeling that fear into something that actually supports and nurtures the stuff we care about and is in alignment with our values. We don't want just fear to take over. I'd say that's my intervention trick about, I'm afraid. Absolutely. And also I'm afraid because stuff I love is getting destroyed,
Right. Well, I mean, that's what I'm really taking from what you're saying. These things can be binary, right? Like in a lot of kind of climate-y communications advice, give people hope. Like people need hope, And actually, that isn't uniformly true anyway. A lot of people are motivated by anger as much as they're motivated by hope. Like and talked about this in my previous episode. There are different types of hope that sustain us, and some of those don't feel like hope to the average kind of person. But also, like we should be scared of losing stuff. We should be scared of what's happening to the planet and what's happening to our politics and what's happening just to our daily lives. Like, fear is good. Shouldn't have it, but of course you got it because you care about stuff. You care about the world. And the question is what you do with it. Where do you go with that, right? And like, I'm interested in whether you think we almost need to ration somehow the amount of fear we're exposed to, Like, I hear what you're saying about, you have a choice in yourself to kind of think about how you respond. But yeah, at the same time, there is so much to be scared of. Like, do we need to kind of not look at all the bad stuff? Not look at all the headlines. Is that necessary?
Yep. Yeah, I actually do think that. And I think if you are spending time on the bad headlines, there's a certain amount of that we want to do to make sure we're on top of stuff, be literate, be aware. But at the same time, I don't think we hold ourselves as accountable to making sure we're paying as much attention to the headlines of the great turning, right? So to go to that concept again, where around us are we putting our attention? It's like sunlight and good soil and fertilizer and water on parts of your garden, right? Like, do you want the chard and the blueberries and the beautiful dahlias to grow, or do you want the bramble and the ivy? Sorry, English ivy is invasive here to grow, right?
Invasive here too.
Yeah,
it's literally coming from a window.
Don't put the sunlight on the invasive ivy, right? So like, it's just sort of, it's kind of a wisdom traditions will hold this. Like in Buddhism, they say, where your attention goes, where your mind goes, your energy flows, or whatever. I can't remember what the exact phrase of it is, but there's neuroscience that's behind this. There's all kinds of like arguments that say that whatever you put your attention on gets bigger, gets more real. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And if the reason I'm afraid is because the stuff I love is getting destroyed, then if I really want to dedicate my life to protecting the stuff I love, sitting in a stew of fear that makes me check out is actually quite counterproductive. Right? So like, what are the emotions I need to leverage, or which stories do I need, or how much information do I need to consume or not consume? That answer to your question about do we want to look at all the news has everything to do with your own personal, how much of the news can I take before I stop doing the things that are in alignment with my values? And everybody's going to have a different answer to that.
Yeah, they are. And you're so right about attention. And the more you've been talking, the more that has really come through to me, that like, actually fear is often about what are you choosing to be exposing yourself to so that you may or may not be scared in the first place. And I've been thinking a lot about attention recently, what with like, thinking about my relationships to social media and all of this sort of stuff. And I've like the thing that someone said, that you should think of attention like you think of food. Like,
totally.
You've got, there's an amount of it effectively that you can kind of dole out in any day.
Exactly.
And you choose what you take into your body. You choose, like, sometimes it's all right to have like a cream bun, but if you just have cream buns, you're not going to be very healthy. And the same's with attention, right? And maybe that feels like just a day-to-day strategy, is to think like, what's the balanced diet that I'm getting here in terms of understanding what's going on, but also giving me the, I'm stretching this metaphor too thin, nutrition to keep up the fight.
Well, it's funny you should use the word nutrition, because actually Thich Nhat Hanh, the kind of famous Zen master, engaged Buddhist who's really gotten into climate stuff at the end of his life, he calls it nutriments, right? He talks about really paying attention to your nutriments, which is kind of like a funny combination of words, but very much connected to this it is like nutrition, right? It is, the nutrients and the nutrition that your body needs to be able to do the work of being engaged in the issues that you care about the most. So yeah, paying really close attention to what you're letting into your system, because your system has to be able to function to keep doing the work you want it to be doing. So yeah, I'd say I'm absolutely all for not pretending is not the word, but treating our bodies and our attention as if it is that kind of a thing, right? Like there's only so much attention we have during the day. And we want to live in a world that is bringing forward this great turning, or whatever it is that we want the world to be. We want to live in a world where the stuff we love is thriving, right? And we can spend a lot of that energy helping the stuff we love thrive, or we can spend a lot of energy worrying about the monster under the bed.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Your Brain on Climate. A huge thanks again to the wonderful Sarah Jaquette Ray. If you like this, check out the back catalogue of Your Brain on Climate. There is plenty of these to go around. Please do share this episode with a chum and drop me a review on your podcast medium of choice. This makes such a big difference to little podcasts like me, swimming in a sea of great big rich companies with pinball machines and sofas and coffee machines. And if you're particularly moved by all of that, you might consider chucking in the price of a cup of tea to support the running costs of this esteemed organ over at patreon.com/yourbrainonclimate. All right, I will be back soon. Until then, be safe, be, I hope, not too fearful, and don't let anyone mediate you into a state of panic. Okay, bye?